Hello and welcome to our opinionated video on foreign aid spending. Opinionated is our new series where we're going to discuss 4 controversial topics, explaining both sides of the argument. We've surveyed over 15,000 TLDR viewers to find out what they think, and we're going to analyse the results throughout. As the title suggests, in this episode, we're going to be discussing foreign aid spending. Before we dive in, and as a thank you to the nearly 16,000 respondents, we've sent all of them a promo code to the TLDR merch store, so be sure to check the email address that you provided us with. Also included in that email is a 10% discount code for our pin badge store, so make sure to use that code too. Anyway, that's enough setup, let's get on with the video. Foreign aid spending is money that one government spends in other nations to go towards improving the lives of people all over the world. The UK government says that its spending helps to create a safer, healthier and more prosperous world for people in developing countries and in the UK. The UK spends 0.7% of gross national income on foreign aid. This translates to about £14 billion a year, which for context is about the same amount that the UK gives the EU every year. Although it might not sound it, 0.7% isn't just an arbitrary figure. It's a target that was set by the UN back in 1970. But despite that, the UK only reached the target for the first time in 2013. In 2015, it was put into law, which means that Parliament now has a legal duty to make the 0.7% target, although this can't actually be enforced by the courts. So, while 0.7% is the UN's target, like a lot of targets, most UN members don't actually make it. In fact, the UK is one of only 6 countries to make the target. The other 5 being Norway, Sweden, Luxembourg, Denmark and Germany as of 2016. In cash terms, this makes the UK the 3rd largest foreign aid contributor in the world, with the US in the lead, spending about £33 billion on foreign aid each year. Although this only translates to about 0.18% of their gross national income, and Trump has threatened to cut this to 0.12%. 36% of the UK's foreign aid money is spent via multilateral institutions, like the UN and the EU, while the remaining 64% is spent directly by the government. 15% of this government-spent money goes to humanitarian causes, 13% to multi-sector, 13% also goes to government and civil society, 12% to health, and 11% to education. About 50% of all the UK's foreign aid is spent in Africa, and about 40% is spent in Asia, with the biggest individual recipients being, in order, Pakistan, Syria, Ethiopia, Nigeria and Afghanistan. It's also worth mentioning that not all of this money is spent just as grants. Some money is loaned out to other countries at better than market rates. So why are we doing an opinionated video on it? Well, whenever there's a slow news week, some newspaper or other decides to start up a debate on whether the UK should be spending this money on other countries, when it could be spending it domestically. It's your classic £350 million on the NHS sort of line. Why should the money be spent somewhere else when we need it here? A lot of the people surveyed reflected this kind of attitude, with a decent percentage of people talking about spending money in the UK instead. And to be fair, £14 billion is not a trivial amount of money to be talking about. To put it in context, it's about as much as the annual policing budget, and about 10% of the UK's total health spending. So why do countries spend so much money on foreign aid, when it could be spent domestically? As we said earlier, the UK government says that the money goes towards building a safer, healthier, more prosperous world for people in developing countries and in the UK. But cutting through that, essentially there's 2 reasons. The first is entirely self-interested. Foreign aid lends a country more political weight. It forges political alliances between established countries and developing ones, which might come in handy in the future. China infamously spends a lot of money on foreign aid, in inverted commas, for their own political gain. For example, they lent an astonishing £6 billion during 2018 to Pakistan, who would otherwise have needed an IMF bailout, because it was in their interest to develop the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as part of their One Belt, One Road initiative. The other reason is moral, with some believing that wealthier countries have a moral duty to lend a hand to those less well off, especially in times of need. 80% of our survey respondents thought that richer countries had a moral obligation to smaller countries, and 81% said that aid should be spent helping others affected by natural disasters. While the money could be spent improving policing or the NHS and saving some British lives, the same money will undoubtedly save a lot more lives if it was spent helping famine victims in South Sudan or Yemenis under siege in Saudi Arabia. This isn't to say that governments should allocate all of their money on a purely utilitarian calculation, but that there are two competing principles. On one hand, a purely utilitarian one, about maximising utility by saving as many lives as possible. And on the other hand, the state's responsibility to prioritise its own citizens. How much a state spends on foreign aid reflects how much relative weight a state gives to each principle. Anyway, this might help to explain why 46% of survey respondents thought that the UK should at least maintain its current level of spending, while only 18.5% thought that it should decrease. And it's why basically every major party is committed to the 0.7% target. However, even if you think that wealthier nations like the UK have a moral obligation to help those worse off, you can still maintain that it should decrease its foreign aid spending, if you believe that foreign aid actually harms the recipient, which 20% of our respondents did. The idea here is that developing countries can become dependent on foreign aid, and this prevents them from developing independently. This happens most commonly with food aid, which disincentivizes local food production by reducing market demand, and can actually hurt the local agricultural industry. On a more general level, once a certain proportion, apparently about 15 to 20% of a government's spending, is given by foreign donors, there are no independent measures they can take to cover the budgetary black hole which appears if the aid disappears, which means they have to make sure that donors keep donating. There's actually been some academic work done by Stephen Knack which suggests that high levels of aid actually reduce the quality of governance. This seems to be because once a country becomes reliant on foreign aid, they have to keep their donors happy, and the donors' interests don't always align with those of the electorate. This breeds a political system that's insensitive to the democratic wishes of the electorate, and instead is focused on appeasing its foreign aid donors. While this might keep the cash flowing in the short term, a country is unlikely to be able to develop independently without a functioning political system. Anyway, while there are times in which aid can actually harm the recipient, for the most part, it does actually help. Maybe this just means that foreign aid donors like the UK should discriminate a bit more with their aid. For example, as mentioned above, Pakistan is the single biggest recipient of UK aid, to the tune of some £380 million a year. Pakistan is undeniably economically dependent on other countries' aid, and despite even more lending from China, has just got another $6 billion loan from the IMF for their 22nd IMF bailout. This is also a country that spends over £2 billion on nuclear arms projects. Basically, while aid is good 99% of the time, it's worth exercising some deliberation over where it's spent, which seems, well, pretty obvious now that I've said it out loud. So let's take a closer look at what you thought about this. We asked respondents what percentage of the UK's money they think is being spent on foreign aid projects. 54% of people chose the right answer, 0.7%. 17% underestimated, going for 0.2, while 29% overestimated, opting for 1.5 or 5%. We also asked our viewers where they thought most of the UK's money was ending up, and most people correctly chose Africa. Then we asked under what circumstances would you approve of foreign aid spending. The results in descending order of popularity are: to help those affected by natural disasters, to help those affected by famine, to help develop nations by improving infrastructure, education and/or healthcare, to help those affected by military conflicts, to promote democracy and political stability, and at the bottom, to create and/or strengthen military alliances. If you'd like a deeper analysis of all of the stats across all the different topics in this series, like this video and let us know in the comments, and we can put an article up on our website. A big thank you to everyone who filled out the survey. Your responses make this series possible, and certainly make it more interesting. As I mentioned, we're thanking you with a discount to both of our merch stores. So if you want to buy some TLDR shirts, hoodies, jumpers, mugs, phone cases or stickers, then head over to the Teespring store and use the discount code we emailed you for 10% off. Remember, you needed to provide your email address and give us permission to contact you for that email to be sent. So it's possible that if you don't have an email in your inbox, you didn't give us permission to contact you. If you want 10% off our pin badges, then head over to our website, tldrnews.co.uk/store, and use the promo code that we sent you in the email. That code is only valid for a limited time, and once per survey respondent, so make sure to use it in time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date when we release more videos. You can also hit the bell icon to get notified every time we release a video. If you want more from TLDR News, you can find us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name featured at the end of videos just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.